Welcome to part 3 of our Creative Effects video lesson, and here we're going to add a sense of speed with a zoom burst effect. Now when you take a shot you can actually zoom out during the taking of the photograph to add a zoom burst effect to the picture, but that all depends on your timing, the shutter speed you're using, and especially if you're following a moving car like this it can be a bit tricky to get the effect correctly and get the car in frame at the same time. But if you use Photoshop to add a zoom burst effect you can get a nicely framed shot and add the blur to exactly the right bits of the image to create this amazing motion blur effect. Now we're going to show you how to do that using layers and filters and masks, but let's kick off with the start image, which is called part 3 before, and what we'll do is we'll rotate the shot to get the car leaning into the frame to give it a sense of speed with the crop and rotate. So kick off in Photoshop Elements or in CS if you've got that, and double click on the locked background layer to unlock it, click OK, and we can now press Ctrl and T for the free transform tool, and you'll see a handle appear around the edge of the frame. You can drag outside that to get the rotate icon and rotate the car to tilt it so it's leaning into the frame. An angle of around about 15.7 degrees should do the trick on the rotation. Click the tick to apply the change. Now by rotating this shot we create these transparent areas around the edge of the frame which we need to fill in and recreate using the clone stamp. But we don't need to recreate all of these areas because we can crop some of them out. And we also need to reposition the car, so let's grab the move tool, drag that up to bring the wheel back into frame, then grab the crop tool and just crop out some of those transparent edges. Something like that should do the trick. Click the tick to apply the crop. We now have a tighter looking shot, but the whole of the car is in the frame. The next thing to do is just to move the layers palette out of the way for the moment, and we need to fill in these transparent areas. We're also going to clone out this background car to make the shot look much cleaner. Now to clone out this car here we need to protect the car that we want to keep, and to do that I'm going to use a selection tool. If we click here you'll find we've got the magnetic lasso. Click to select that, set width to 5, contrast to 7, and then if you just click up to here and follow the edge of the car like so, you should be able to make a selection to include the car. Click if you need to place a point manually, and it will automatically add anchor points as you move the cursor around the edge like so. It doesn't have to be terribly tidy because we're going to actually apply motion blur here, but it helps us clone out the unwanted car around about here. If you click at this point and then draw to the edge of the frame, click again, go up to the top, click again, and then click up here, then we can make sure that the areas we want to get rid of with this background car are all now part of that selection marquee. Now when I clone, I tend to clone into a separate layer, so let's do that by clicking on the create new layer icon. That just helps us protect this bottom layer if we need to get some of the pixels from that later. Once you're on the new layer, grab the clone stamp tool by clicking here. Make sure you've ticked sample all layers and keep aligned ticked as well for starters, and then what we can do on this new layer is we can choose a nice soft edge brush of around about 200. That should do the trick. Just click outside there to close that. If we alt click to sample a bit of this green area here, we can then move over to this part of the car and click and spray to extend that area to the right, and that's a great way of cloning in some grass and background tarmac without actually cloning over the foreground car. We can only probably get a little bit of that before we start to include the car in the selection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to alt click again, just around about here maybe, and then just go over to this point this time and click and spray to extend the grass and the background like so. So we can tidy the track up a little bit more in just a tick, and so little and often enables us to clone out the problem area. I'm just going to click down here, alt click, there we go, and then I can grab that little bit, and you can see we've got a little preview of the area that we're cloning because I've gone to this option here and we've made sure that show overlay is ticked. It'll be ticked by default, but in older versions of Photoshop Elements it might not be, so make sure overlay is ticked just to help you position your clone pixels more effectively. I'm now adding some of the tarmac to this area here. We're going around the car like so. I've just extended some of this brown area at the top into the top section here to hide the rest of the unwanted tarmac in the background, and if I press Ctrl D now I can deselect that marquee, and that allows me to get any areas that I've missed by alt clicking here and just spraying down the edge of the frame just to tidy up some of those transparent edges that we're seeing around about here. Lots of little alt clicks is a good way to cover any unwanted areas that are remaining. There's a little bit here as well. Click here, and so on and so forth, and finally alt click and spray. So we're just tidying up the edge of the frame like so. Now we've got areas like this foreground here, so make sure you've Control D to deselect this layer so you can actually continue clicking and sampling areas like this. If I click on the edge, I can then move down to here. I can shift click, hold shift down and click again, and that draws a straight line between the 2 points. Click one more time, hold shift, click again, and that's a great way of drawing straight lines and finishing off this area by extending into the transparent section like so. I'll finish that off in just a tick. I just want to show you that technique. And again, up here you can alt click at the edge, grab some of that blue, click, hold shift down. That will draw you a nice straight line. Click again, hold shift, and click again to draw between the 2 points. So you can see the techniques there. And I've just jumped forward in time to finish tidying up the cloned pixels. And because we're on a separate layer, if you find you've cloned into the car, like this area here, you can grab the eraser and use a nice small brush and just hold the shift button down, click again, and that draws a straight line between the 2 points and restores any bits of missing car, like so. So there's the clone pixels. When you're finished with this layer, you can merge it with the original by clicking here and choosing merge down, and here we have our isolated car with a nice clean shot there. We've lost the background car there now, and we're now ready to apply our cool zoom burst effect. Now, to stop the effect being over the top, we're going to actually apply it to a separate layer and then blend the two layers together to reveal some sharp details and some blurred details. To do that, we need to copy layer 0 by dragging it to the create new layer icon, and then target the copy, go to filter, go down to blur, go down to motion blur, and up pops this window here. I can click on part of the car to preview it, and then we can get the angle the same as the tilt of the car, around about 16 degrees or so to do the trick. I can then increase the distance to around about 280 pixels or so, 289 should do the trick, and then click to apply the blur, and that is giving us the basis of our zoom burst effect. Now our zoom burst effect is too strong, so we're not seeing any of the sharper details below, so target the layer, click on the add layer mask icon to add a white mask, grab the brush tool, choose a nice large brush like 300 and make sure that the foreground color is black. And then when you click on the mask and spray black over the area, you're actually hiding parts of the top layer, you're masking them out, and you're revealing some of the sharper pixels on the layer below. And that's a great way to selectively blur the car. If you want to do a more gentle blur, you can reduce the opacity to a grey stroke, something like 59%, and that gives you a more gentle blend between the blurred areas and the sharp areas, especially at the edge of the car. We want the blur to be going towards the left there, so we can lose some of the blur on the right here just by clicking and spraying like so, just to take the edge off. If I click again, that will make a stronger edit because we're just tidying up the edge. So that's a really cool way of doing a selective blur effect, so you can see specific areas more clearly. If you want to see the logo here, then you can spray on that like so. A grey stroke will also help us restore some of this little logo at the top, and then we've got a nice selective zoom burst effect showing through quite nicely. If that's too strong, we can swap these colours around and then just click and spray to start hiding that with a little bit of blur. So you can fine tune this to perfection, and you can see we've got lots of different coloured strokes there. If I alt click on the mask, the black is making a solid hole and the grey is making a semi-transparent hole in that top layer. So we're mixing different levels of opacity together to fine tune our effect. Let's click back on the mask. Let's take the opacity down to around about 50% or so and click and spray just to bring back a little bit more detail in this wheel here. Then to make the wheel look like it's going round, what we can do is target the background layer, grab the elliptical marquee tool, alt click to choose the middle of the wheel and click and draw from that central point just to get a nice ellipse. We can then transform that by going to select, transform selection, and we can rotate by dragging outside of the ellipse till it matches the wheel approximately. That should do the trick. Click the tick. You can then fine-tune the ellipse's position using the arrow keys just to kind of make sure that the wheel is covered. And then, with the background layer still selected, we can go to Filter, Blur again, but this time we're going to go to Radial Blur. And you can use the defaults for this. You can leave blur amount on 10, and you can keep the method on spin, keep the quality to good, and click OK. And the cool thing about Photoshop is if you press Ctrl and F, you can reapply the same filter to the same selected area just to add a little bit more radial blur to make this look even more rotatey, if that's the right word. Finally, I can Ctrl D to deselect that, and I can fine tune my layer by clicking on the top. And if I take opacity down a little bit to around about 81%, we can see some of the sharper details on the layer below, but still have this cool radial blur effect. So you can fine tune things until you're perfectly happy with the finished result. So that's the end of creating a dramatic zoom burst effect. Next thing we're going to do in part 4 is get creative with textures and overlays. See you then.